Today's lesson is part 1 of dividing polynomials. I remember when I first learned how to divide polynomials and I looked at it and I thought it was the most difficult thing in the world. And then once I figured out how to do it, I realized that it was really pretty fun. So I hope that your experience is the same. Don't give up. Rewatch the video as many times as you need to. Do the practice problems. I'm actually going to split this into 2 days so that it's not too overwhelming all at once. But I think that if you stick with it, you will say, well, that's not so bad. So to start this lesson, I'm actually going to have you do a long division problem, just to remind yourself of the basic steps of long division. So as you do this problem, the goal isn't just to whip it out as fast as you can, but really to think about what are the steps that you're doing along the way. So as you were doing this long division problem, hopefully you remembered that the first term always goes up is the dividend. It goes in the house. The second term is the divisor. It goes out the door. And I did this yesterday in the video, and I just did it again now. I called these terms. They're not really terms because terms are added and subtracted together. So I got to be more careful with my use of that vocabulary. So the first number is the dividend, the divisor. Then I ask myself, how many times does 3 go into 3? So the first part is that I'm going to divide. And I say it goes 1 time. And then I do 1 times 3 is 3. So then I multiply. Then I subtract and get 0. And then I bring down the next number, so I bring down the 6. And then I go through the process all over again. So then I ask myself, how many times does 3 go into 6? How many groups of 3 can I make, which is 2? Then I multiply 2 times 3 to get 6. I subtract, bring down one number. 3 goes into 2 0 times. Sometimes I don't expect you guys would have made this mistake, but maybe, because you haven't done long division just like this for a while. You can only bring down one number at a time. So as soon as I bring down that 2 and I say that 3 can't go into 2 at all, I need to put a 0. Once you put a 0, I don't care if you put this 0 and subtract, but remember you can only bring down one number at a time. So now I'm going to bring down the 7. 3 goes into 27 9 times. So again, we go through this cycle over and over, divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. When I was teaching kids how to do this in 4th grade, we said dad, mom, sister, brother, as a reminder that we have all of those members in our long division family. So as we're going forward with dividing polynomials, I just want you to remember those steps. All right, the first type of problem that we're going to do is we're going to divide a polynomial by a monomial. So as an example, this is our polynomial, and we're going to divide it by the monomial. So in this case, when I just have a monomial, I know that I need to divide every term, and I'm using term correctly this time because they're being added and subtracted. I'm just going to divide every term by the monomial. So I get 3x squared. Need a pen first. I get 3x squared divided by 3x. Plus x divided by 3x minus 6 divided by 3x. So again, that gets applied to each of those terms, and then I just reduce each of those terms. So in this case, I'm going to be able to reduce the 3's. I'm going to get rid of one of those x's and that x, so I'm left in that term with just an x on the top. Here I can reduce those x's, so I get plus 3, and then over here I got 2 and a 1. So this is my minus 2 over x. So that one is pretty simple, where I just divided everything by that monomial. So I'm going to give you a chance to pause the video and practice on your own with the problem over here. And then when you're ready, start the video again and the answer will be there. While you were working on that practice problem, I realized I made a mistake over here. So some of you might have caught it and said, wait a minute. This 3 is in the denominator, so this really should have been 1 over 3 minus 2 over x. So I'm going to write it better because it's bugging me since I already made a mistake. So hopefully that looks better. On your practice problem, you should have ended up with x minus 4 plus 8 over x. Next, we're going to divide a polynomial by a binomial, and we're going to start where we have problems with no remainder. So again, I'm going to do an example and then give you a practice problem. So is to get this the right size. So when I am when I have a binomial here instead of monomial, I'm actually then going to write it as a division problem that looks like this. Now you might be thinking back to yesterday's lesson and saying, well, couldn't I factor this and then divide by that? And yes, you could, and sometimes that will not work. So we're learning another technique. I believe if I factored this, I'd get x plus 3 and x plus 1, right? So then I would be able to cancel my x plus 1s. So my guess is that my answer is going to be x plus 3 before I even do this problem. But again, there are going to be times where that's not going to work, especially once I have a remainder. So I want to have another technique. So that's what we're learning right here. So think about when you're dividing and you have a 2-digit divisor, and you can actually look at the first digit to give you a clue about the remaining, about what comes after it. So I'm really just going to look at this leading digit right now. So I'm going to ask myself, how many times does x go into x squared? So it goes in x times, right? But remember, when I'm dividing, I'm super careful about how I'm lining things up. So even when I'm just doing long division with numbers, I have to make sure that I'm in the right place. So when I'm asking myself how many times x goes into this, and I know that it's going to be x times, I'm looking at the leading digits. Just bear with me until we get through this one. I actually just need to do the work, and I think it will become more clear. I'm going to line it up above the x, not above the x squared. You'll see why in a minute. And then I'm going to multiply. So x times x is x squared. X times 1 is 1x. And then I can subtract. So x squared minus x squared is 0. 4x minus 1x is 3x. And I'm going to carry down. Then I'm going to do the same process. How many times does x go into 3x? It goes 3 times. So then I've got 3 times x is 3x. 3 times 1 is 3. And I subtract and I get 0. So in fact, my answer was x plus 3. And one of the tricky things in here is about lining it up. So I'm actually going to do this next one, which I originally was going to do as a practice problem, as another example. So again, I'm going to write down divisor and the dividend. This should have been minus. And then I'm going to ask myself, how many times does x go into x squared? Well, it goes x times. But I'm going to line the x up with this x. Then I've got x times x is x squared. X times 2 is plus 2x. Then I can subtract. Minus 6 minus 2 is minus 8x. So be super careful with those negatives. Then I'm going to bring down. Then I'm going to ask myself, how many times does x go into negative 8x? So that's going to be negative 8. And I'm going to multiply negative 8 times x. And negative 8 times 2. And I'm going to end up with 0 again. So the trickiest part is lining everything up. But hopefully after a couple examples here, you can see how that works. So now I'm going to give you a practice problem. So here's your practice problem, and as soon as you're done, you can unpause the video and check your work. On this practice problem, I think the tricky thing was the subtraction right in here. So as soon as I said that it went into this x number of times, I had x times x is x squared, x times minus 7 is minus 7x, and then this was minus 14 minus negative 7x. So it was negative 14 plus 7x, which left me with minus 7x, and then bring down the 49. Remember that you can always check your work at the end. So I was dividing by x minus 7, and I found x minus 7. So those were my two. If I made it into a multiplication problem, it would be this times this equals this, or this times this equals this. So in fact, if I multiply this, I do get minus 14x plus 49. So that's a good way to check it if you're unsure. Our next example is dividing a polynomial by a binomial when we're going to have a remainder. So this is the first sample problem I'm going to do, and I'm going to write it down this way. This is where what we did yesterday would not work anymore. So if I want to have a remainder, then I wouldn't have been able to factor this and then divide by this. So this is example of why we learned this other technique. But I'm going to follow the same steps. I'm going to ask myself, how many times does y go into y squared? So it goes y times. So I'm going to line up my y's with my term that just has the y on it. Then I've got y times y is y squared. Y times negative 3 is minus 3y. I'm going to subtract, being really careful with the negatives. Negative 7 minus negative 3 is the same as negative 7 plus 3, so that's going to be negative 4y plus 2. Then I'm going to ask myself, how many times does y go into negative 4y? So it will be negative 4. So negative 4 times y is negative 4y plus 12, because negative 4 times negative 3 is positive 12. Negative 4 minus negative 4y is 0. 2 minus 12 is negative 10. So my answer is y minus 4. And if you were doing this, if you're thinking of long division when you were in 4th grade, you would just write r, remainder, minus 10. But you know we have to be much more sophisticated than that. So if you remember, if I was doing this all with numbers, my remainder could also be written as this number divided by this number. So for example, if I had 13 divided by 4, and I wrote it like this, I would say that it's 3 and 1/4. Or you'd add a decimal point and you would change it into a decimal problem. But remember that I could express, this is what I do with mixed numbers. So I do 3 and 1/4. So the same thing here, I have y minus 4 minus 10, and then that's going to be divided by y minus 3. So that's this minus 10 divided by the divisor. Let's do another example like that. In this next example, notice that this is not written in standard form, and this is not written in standard form. So when I rewrite this problem with the divisor house, I'm going to change these so that they are in standard form. So I'm going to change that to x plus 2, and I'm going to change this to x squared plus 4x minus 5. Then I'm going to ask myself, how many times does x go into x squared? It goes x times x is x squared. X times 2 is 2x. I'm going to subtract, bring down. How many times does x go into 2x? 2 times. 2 times x is 2x. 2 times 2 is plus 4. So negative 5 minus 4 is minus 9. I have nothing left to bring down. So then I'm going to write my answer as x plus 2 minus 9 divided by x plus 2. All right, here's one last practice problem for you to try, and then come back and see the answer. And then you will have some practice problems on a worksheet, and the key is also listed, is also there. The key right now does not have all of the steps on it, but I'm thinking as I'm talking through this that it would be useful for it to have the steps, so I will do that first thing in the morning and put a new key on there. And finally, there's your answer to your last practice problem And I'm out of time.